It had been 4 long years since Johnson had lost his job, a stable position at a thriving company that had once given him a sense of purpose and dignity. The layoff came abruptly, a cruel blow during a time when he had so many dreams for the future. Since then, his life had been a downward spiral. Every day brought new rejections as he tirelessly applied for jobs, attended interviews, and endured the constant disappointment of hearing, "We'll get back to you." They never did. The struggle to survive became his daily reality. His savings dwindled until there was nothing left. Feeding himself and his wife, Deola, became a serious trouble. Rent payments were constantly overdue, and he was perpetually haunted by the fear of eviction. The shame of borrowing from friends and neighbors, who often turned him away with judgmental stares, only deepened his misery. Johnson had always been a very hard-working man, believing his hard work and determination would eventually pay off. But as days turned into months and months into years, his confidence crumbled. He began avoiding old friends and former colleagues, too ashamed to face their questions about his situation. Deola, his wife, had been his rock in the early days of his unemployment, reassuring him that things would get better. She cut back on her expenses and stood by him even as their lives became harder. But her patience wasn't infinite. The constant hunger, the lack of basic necessities, and the hopelessness that seemed to hang over their small home like a dark cloud began to wear her down. Each Christmas had been worse than the last. The first year, they had shared a modest meal of rice and stew, consoling themselves that things would improve. By the second Christmas, they were down to gari and water. This year, there was nothing at all, not even a grain of rice in the house. Deola had reached her breaking point. She had spent the night before Christmas sitting on their worn-out mattress, thinking about her life and the bleak future ahead if she remained with Johnson. She loved him, but love alone couldn't fuel an empty stomach or provide a roof over her head. They had no children to consider, which made her decision both easier and harder. She didn't want to abandon him, but she couldn't see herself enduring the endless cycle of poverty any longer. On Christmas morning, she packed her belongings. "Good morning, dear." Johnson greeted her, his voice weak and laced with sadness. Deola didn't reply, her heart too heavy with the burden of what she was about to do. "Where are you going this early with your belongings? Are you traveling without telling me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'm not traveling. I'm leaving you, Johnson. I'm never coming back." Her tone was firm, but her eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. "Is it a crime to love you? I've endured so much, but I can't take it anymore. Ordinary food, oh. You can't even provide that. Just the two of us. Thank God we don't have children yet. You are worse than an infidel, Johnson." With that, she walked out the door, leaving Johnson stunned and heartbroken. He didn't bother to beg her to stay. He knew she had suffered enough, and he had no hope to offer her, no assurance that things would get better. As the door closed behind her, Johnson sank to the floor, tears streaming down his face. He felt utterly defeated, abandoned, and alone. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like a boulder, and for the first time, he questioned whether life was even worth living anymore. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. That morning, Johnson received a gift that would change everything, a gift that not only saved him from the despair that had consumed him, but also gave him a new reason to hope. As Deola's footsteps faded into the distance, Johnson sat in the room, staring blankly at the cracked walls. He was as fed up with life as his wife had been. The silence in the house was deafening, a stark reminder of the emptiness that had now taken over his life. With no family to turn to and no wife to share his burdens, Johnson felt lost and abandoned. The weight of his circumstances pressed heavily on him, suffocating any glimmer of hope he might have held onto. Thoughts of ending it all crept into his mind. What is the point of living when life is nothing but suffering? He asked himself. Yet, a small rational voice inside him pushed back. Ending your life would be foolish, it said. But the louder, desperate voice argued otherwise. Do it, end the pain. Just take your life. He sat there, battling with himself, caught in a tug of war between despair and survival. Just then, a sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. He froze, startled. His heart leaped with a fleeting hope. Could it be Deola? Maybe she changed her mind and came back. He hurried to the door and flung it open, but there was no one there. Confused, he stepped outside and looked around. His eyes fell on a large basket placed carefully by his doorstep. It was a hamper. Cautiously, Johnson picked it up and scanned the surroundings again. There were no signs of anyone nearby. He carried it inside and placed it on the table, eyeing it suspiciously. It was filled with several food items and provisions, cookies, canned goods, beverages, and even a small bottle of wine. Nestled among the items was a folded note. He opened it and read, "Wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in advance. We love you." Josie stared at the note, perplexed. Who could have sent this? He picked up his phone and called a few friends who knew his address, but they all denied sending anything. His skepticism grew. Maybe it's a mistake or a delivery to the wrong address, he thought, unwilling to assume it was his to keep. He placed the basket aside, determined to wait for the rightful owner to come and claim it. Hours passed, and the festive aroma of fried rice and chicken wafted through the neighborhood. It only heightened his hunger. He had been drinking water all day to suppress the gnawing pain in his stomach, but it was no longer enough. As the evening approached and no one came to claim the hamper, Johnson gave in to his hunger. He started with the cookies, savoring each bite as though it were the finest meal he had ever tasted. As he ate, he began to dig deeper into the contents of the basket. There were packets of rice, tins of sardines, spices, and even a small box of chocolates. Then his hand touched an envelope. Curious, he opened it and froze in shock. Inside was a wad of crisp dollar bills. His first instinct was to scream, but he quickly clamped a hand over his mouth. His heart raced as he counted the money. Disbelief etched on his face. It was a substantial amount, enough to cover his rent, buy food, and even give him a fresh start. Johnson's mind swelled with question. How? Who? Why me? Could this be a trap? Fear crept in as he imagined all sorts of scenarios. What if someone comes knocking, accusing me of theft? What if this money belongs to dangerous people? Determined not to act rashly, he decided to wait to see if anyone would come forward to claim the hamper or the money. His mind was torn between hope and fear, yet no one came knocking. Johnson's initial skepticism began to wane, replaced by a cautious sense of gratitude. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps fate or a kind-hearted stranger had finally smiled upon him. As he sat to prepare his proper meal of the day, Johnson's eyes welled up with tears. He whispered a heartfelt prayer, thanking God for what he could only describe as a miracle. This unexpected gift was more than food and money. It was hope. It reminded him that even in the darkest moments, life could still surprise him. Little did he know, this Christmas gift was just the beginning of a turnaround he could never have imagined. Johnson finally concluded that it was a miraculous Christmas gift. Perhaps it's from God, he said aloud, his voice laced with a mixture of relief and gratitude. He knelt down on the cold floor and poured out his heart in a prayer of thanksgiving. Just as he was standing up from his prayer, he heard the knock at the door. His heart sank. Disappointment gripped him. Why now? He thought. Why would the person show up just after I have thanked God for this miracle? He debated ignoring the knock, but his conscience wouldn't let him. Resigned, he rushed to the door and opened it to find a man and a young boy standing there. The boy stepped forward hesitantly. "Good evening, sir. I think I made a mistake this morning. I dropped a hamper at the wrong house." Johnson's heart dropped into his stomach. Embarrassment and pain washed over him. Why now? He thought again. He had eaten some of the contents, read the notes, and even discovered the envelope of money. Now, he would have to return it all. With a forced smile, He admitted to seeing the hamper and apologized. The man, Mr. Makinde, nodded understandingly and asked for the basket to be returned. Johnson turned reluctantly to fetch it. As he re-entered the room, Mr. Makinde glanced inside and noticed the emptiness of the space. The sparsity spoke volumes: bare walls and rickety table, and a tattered mat on the floor. When Johnson returned with the hamper, Mr. Makinde looked into his eyes and saw the heavy disappointment there. Instead of taking the basket, Mr. Makinde gently asked, "Could I have a glass of water, please?" Johnson hesitated, confused by the request, but invited the man and his son inside. While he fetched water, Mr. Makinde struck up a conversation, asking questions about Johnson's life and struggles. Johnson hesitated at first, but eventually opened up. He spoke of losing his job 4 years ago, his fruitless effort to find employment, and how the weight of his hopelessness had almost driven him to take his own life before the hamper arrived. Moved by the story, Mr. Makinde decided on the spot. "Keep the hamper," he said, "and the money too." He reached into his pocket and handed Johnson his business card. "Come to my office after the holidays. Let's see how we can work together." Johnson was stunned. He could barely speak as he thanked Mr. Makinde profusely. After the Christmas holiday, Johnson visited Mr. Makinde's office. The building was an impressive structure in the heart of the city, reflecting its owner's success. Makinde Holdings specialized in consulting and logistics, employing hundreds of staff. Despite his wealth, Mr. Makinde was known for his simplicity and humility. His reputation as a compassionate leader and generous philanthropist preceded him. In the spacious office, Johnson had an intellectual discussion with Mr. Makinde, who was impressed by his sharp mind and articulate responses. It didn't take long for Mr. Makinde to decide. "I have a position in my company that I think you'll be perfect for," he said with a warm smile. Johnson was offered the role of business development analyst with a competitive salary, benefits, and a clear path for growth. It felt like a dream. Within weeks, Johnson's life transformed. He moved into a modest but comfortable apartment closer to work, bought new clothes, and began repaying debt he had accumulated over the years. He found a renewed sense of purpose in his work. His days were now filled with productive tasks, meaningful interactions, and a steady income. His evenings, once haunted by despair, were now peaceful and filled with hope. News of his turnaround reached Deola, who couldn't believe her ears when she heard of his newfound success. She sent a message congratulating him and even hinted at reconciliation. But Johnson, while still grateful for their time together, knew it was best to focus on building his new life. As months turned into years, Johnson not only grew in his career but also began giving back to those in need, inspired by the kindness of Mr. Makinde. That Christmas gift wasn't just a basket of food. It was a second chance, a lifeline, and a reminder that miracles do happen. I hope you enjoyed this story. Here is wishing you a Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. I love you. I love you. Merry Christmas, everyone. Have a great celebration. Goodbye.